Gospel lesson is from John chapter 20. This is John's account of the resurrection. Let us honor the reading of the gospel as we stand as you are able. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the tomb. So she ran and went to Simon Peter and the other disciple, the one whom Jesus loved, and said to them, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we do not know where they have laid him." Then Peter and the other disciple set out and went toward the tomb. The two were running together, but the other disciple outran Peter and reached the tomb first. He bent down to look in and saw the linen wrappings lying there, but he did not go in. Then Simon Peter came, following him, and went into the tomb. He saw the linen wrappings lying there, and the cloth that had been at Jesus' head, not lying with the linen wrappings, but rolled up in a place by itself. Then the other disciple, who reached the tomb first, also went in, and he saw and believed. For as yet they did not understand the scripture, that he must rise from the dead. Then the disciples returned to their homes, but Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white sitting there where the body of Jesus had been lying, one at the head and the other at the feet. They said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping?" She said to them, "They have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him." When she had said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not know that it was him. Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away." Jesus said to her, "Mary." She turned and said to him in Hebrew, "Rabboni," which means teacher. Jesus said to her, "Do not hold on to me, because I have not yet ascended to the Father. But go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, "I have seen the Lord." And she told them that he had said these things to her. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You may be seated. Resurrection begins in the darkness. All four Gospels talk about how the resurrection story begins early in the morning, while it was still dark, when things are hazy and confusing. I wish it weren't so. In my 30 years or so of ministry, I have served churches that have Easter sunrise services, where you have to get up like at 5 a.m., drive to a town cemetery or a public garden or a public park, and gather with maybe about 20 or 30 people. And out of 20 or 30 people, I would say 8 or 9 are very excited and enthusiastic about a sunrise service. We do them because all the Gospels say that while it was still dark, it was still early, they went to the tomb. So I have a slight confession. When it comes to sunrise services, not a big fan. I wish the gospel writers had written something like, "And after sleeping in till 9 a.m. and grabbing a breakfast at first watch and then swinging by Starbucks to get a coffee, the disciples then gradually made their way to the tomb." Alas, that is not how the story goes. Someone has said that Easter does not happen in a bright, airy, decked out in white church sanctuary. Easter doesn't happen around the dinner table when we have our families around us and mounds of delicious food piled high to enjoy. But rather, Easter begins in an emergency room, when the doctor comes out to the waiting area and she shakes her head and she announces, "I'm sorry, we've done all that we could." Easter happens at the funeral home when you get that first glimpse of your loved one in the casket and it hits you like a punch in the gut. Easter happens in nursing homes where once strong-bodied men and women watch their peers begin to fade. Easter happens where there is death, because that is the only place that Easter is needed. Only where there are graves are there resurrections, said surprisingly by the atheist philosopher Nietzsche. Mary went to the tomb with the two disciples. They looked in. The two disciples then went back home, but Mary lingered at the tomb for one last glimpse. Except when she looks in for the second time, the tomb wasn't empty. It was occupied by what appeared to be two men who asked, "Why are you weeping?" And then Mary turns and she sees a stranger. And John lets us in on the secret that this is no stranger, this is Jesus himself, who asks, "Why are you weeping? Whom are you looking for?" That second question is very interesting. It's an echo of a similar question asked by Jesus at the beginning of John's Gospel when he notices two disciples walking behind him, following behind him, and he turns and he asks them, "What are you looking for?" What are you looking for? Those are the first words of Jesus recorded in John's Gospel. And who are you looking for are the first words of the resurrected Jesus in John's Gospel. John says that Mary supposed the stranger to be the gardener, which is interesting because only John mentions this detail. Only John locates the tomb in a garden. It's an odd bit of information. Why is there a garden in a graveyard? John's Easter story is a confusing combination of paradoxes, of gardens and graves. One plot of ground nurtures life. Another plot of ground is for the disposing of dead life. Life and death in John chapter 20 are intertwined. Mary mistakes Jesus for a gardener, or maybe it wasn't a mistake after all. Jesus had taught them a bit of a gardening lesson also in John's Gospel when he said that unless a grain of wheat falls into the earth and dies, it remains just a single grain. But if it dies, it bears much fruit. Now the gardener has come again to prove his point. In Genesis, we are told that in the beginning, death came to humanity in the midst of a garden. In John, we are told now that there is a new beginning, that a garden will be planted in the midst of a graveyard. The place of death becomes the place of life. So maybe thinking that Jesus was the gardener wasn't a mistake after all. The mystery of the unknown gardener is revealed only when Mary hears him speak her name. And could it be that Mary remembered Jesus' words and his teaching when he told the disciples, "The good shepherd calls his own sheep, he knows them by name, and he calls them by name." Mary stayed just long enough to hear her name be called, and she responded joyfully by clinging to Jesus, who gently tells her, "Don't hold on to me, for I have not yet ascended. Don't cling to me, don't hold on to me." I wonder if Mary was afraid of losing Jesus. She didn't understand that you can't have Jesus by holding on to him. When I was a boy, summertime meant lazy days and sleeping in and backyard baseball. And also one of my favorite activities was watching lightning bugs in my yard. But I wasn't content with just watching them or trying to count them. I would go and get one of my mom's large mason jars, And then I'd go around catching them, right? Show of hands, you used to do this? Yep. And I would catch a lot of fireflies and put the cover on and would just admire the lightning bugs in my room. But if you forgot to put the holes in the top, guess what would happen? The lightning bugs would eventually fade. How many of us had that happen? Right. Yeah, a lot of dead lightning bugs in our lifetimes, right? Their mystery and their beauty were best seen when they were allowed to roam free, not when they were trapped, not when we tried to hold on to them. In John's Gospel, Mary has a number of notable firsts. She was the first to see the resurrected Jesus face to face. She was the first to hear his voice. In some quarters of the church, she is called the first apostle, commissioned by Christ himself to go and tell what she had seen. She was the first to preach the resurrected Christ. And her first sermon did not have cute stories about precocious children in a Sunday school class. Her first sermon was not, did not have 3 points and a poem at the end. But rather, her first sermon only had 1 point. I have seen the Lord. It was arguably the shortest sermon on the resurrection ever given, and yet it was the most profound. That 5-word proclamation stirred the other obstinate, doubting disciples, otherwise known as the men, to reconsider what they had seen. That one sentence was just enough to put a tiny crack in the foundation of the world as they knew it. It was just enough to disrupt everything they had ever known and believed. Words have power. We are a people of the Word. God reveals God's self through words. Mary Ann Bird was a columnist for a small newspaper in Massachusetts. She was born with a severe cleft palate that required multiple surgeries in her childhood. When she started school, her classmates made it clear to her how she looked to them. A little girl with a misshapen lip, a crooked nose, lopsided teeth, and garbled speech. It was not a pretty childhood. When classmates asked what happened to your lip, she would lie and tell them a story about how she had tripped and fallen on some rocks. Somehow it just seemed more acceptable to have suffered an accident than to have been born different. There was, however, a saving grace for Mary Ann Bird, and that was her 3rd grade teacher, whom she adored, Mrs. Leonard. Every year, all the students were required to take the annual hearing test, which back in those days meant that each student would be called up to the teacher's desk, and the teacher would whisper a phrase or a question in each student's ear. Things like, "The sky is purple," or "Do you have new shoes?" And the students would then, in turn, repeat the phrase or the question back to the teacher. To avoid humiliation or failure, Mary Ann Bird would always cheat on the test. She would secretly cup her good ear so that she could hear the question or the statement from the teacher. On the day of the annual hearing test, Mary Ann Bird was called to Mrs. Leonard's desk. And there she stood and she waited for Mrs. Leonard to issue some random question or a silly statement. But instead, Mrs. Leonard leaned in to whisper in her ear the words that changed Mary Ann Bird's life. The words were, "I wish you were my daughter." Mary Ann Bird would later say that God must have put those words in her mouth because they changed my life. It was as if someone else were in the room that day. It was as if someone else had called her by name, Mary Ann. And hearing those words was like hearing the voice of someone who knows you the most and the deepest, Those words were resurrection. In a moving reflection, Father Kenneth Tanner writes that resurrection means getting back to gardening as the primary vocation of humanity. Resurrection means welcoming the stranger and hearing their good news. Resurrection means getting back to cooking and hosting and celebrating as the primary forms of human recreation. Mary's first sermon that Easter was, "I have seen the Lord." So I want to leave you with these two questions. Where have you seen the Lord in your life? What have you seen the Lord do? Your response, however you choose to answer those two questions, that's your Easter sermon. Now, go and tell. Thanks be to God. Amen.